My name is Alexander and I want to tell you a story that changed my life forever. It's a story about trust, betrayal, and how sometimes the truth turns out to be completely different from what it seems. This is my story told from the heart of a man who thought he knew everything about love, only to discover he knew nothing at all. Catherine and I met 7 years ago during our final year at university. It was one of those classic college romance stories that you see in movies. She was the most beautiful girl in our program, and I was just an ordinary guy from a small town who had come to the capital to get an education and hopefully build a better life for himself. Catherine had everything that drew people to her like moths to a flame. Long chestnut hair that caught the light just right, emerald green eyes that seemed to hold secrets, and a smile that could stop conversations mid-sentence. She was studying marketing and communications, always impeccably dressed, always surrounded by friends. I, on the other hand, was a computer science major who spent most of my time in the library or computer lab, wearing the same 3 hoodies in rotation. The day we first spoke was completely by accident. I was rushing to submit an assignment before the deadline, carrying my laptop, a stack of printed code, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. As I hurried across the campus courtyard, I collided directly with Catherine, sending her books flying and my coffee splashing across both of us. I was mortified. Here was this gorgeous, popular girl, and I had just ruined her white sweater with my terrible coffee. I started apologizing profusely, offering to pay for dry cleaning, basically making a complete fool of myself. But instead of being angry, she started laughing, a genuine warm laugh that made something inside my chest flutter. "It's okay," she said, still laughing as she surveyed the coffee stain. "I never liked this sweater that much anyway. My mom bought it for me and I only wear it to make her happy." That was Catherine, always thinking about other people, always putting others' feelings before her own comfort. It was one of the things I fell in love with first. We ended up going to a cafe together so she could clean up, and somehow that turned into a 3-hour conversation about everything and nothing. She told me about her dreams of working in advertising, about her complicated relationship with her mother, about how she sometimes felt like she was performing a version of herself rather than being authentic. I told her about my small hometown, my parents who worked double shifts to pay for my education, my dreams of creating something meaningful with technology. When we finally parted ways that evening, I was completely smitten. I spent the next week working up the courage to ask her out, convinced that someone like her would never be interested in someone like me. But when I finally did ask, she said yes without hesitation, as if she'd been waiting for me to ask all along. Our first official date was at a small Italian restaurant near campus. I had saved up for weeks to afford it, wanting to impress her. She showed up in a simple blue dress that made her eyes look like jewels, and I felt like the luckiest man alive. We talked until the restaurant started putting chairs on tables around us, completely lost in each other. The courtship period was magical. Catherine had this way of making me feel like I was the most interesting person in the world. She would listen to me talk about coding projects with genuine fascination, ask thoughtful questions, and somehow make me feel like my dreams mattered. In return, I tried to match her energy and enthusiasm for life, accompanying her to art galleries, poetry readings, and social events that were completely outside my comfort zone. We were inseparable during those final months of university. Study sessions together in the library, long walks through the city discovering new neighborhoods, lazy Sunday mornings in bed talking about our future. I knew I was going to marry this woman before we even graduated. After graduation, we both found jobs in the city and decided to move in together. Catherine landed a position at a prestigious advertising agency, while I got hired at a growing tech company. We rented a small 1-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. Those early years of living together were like an extended honeymoon. We would spend our evenings cooking dinner together, watching movies on our second-hand couch, making plans for the future. Catherine was climbing the ladder at her agency quickly, impressing clients with her creativity and professionalism. I was finding my footing in the tech world, working on projects that actually excited me. We got married on a warm Saturday in May, 2 years after we moved in together. It wasn't a big wedding, neither of us had much family, and we preferred to spend our money on a down payment for an apartment rather than an extravagant ceremony. But it was perfect. Catherine wore a simple white dress that she had found at a vintage shop, and I wore the one good suit I owned. We exchanged vows in a small garden ceremony with about 30 of our closest friends, followed by dinner at our favorite restaurant. I remember looking at Catherine as she said her vows, tears streaming down her face as she promised to love me through everything life might throw at us, and thinking that I had won the lottery. Here was this incredible woman choosing me, promising to build a life with me. I felt like I could conquer the world. The first few years of marriage were everything I had dreamed they would be. We settled into our routines. Catherine would wake up early to do yoga and have her coffee while reading the news. I would stumble to the kitchen in my pajamas and she would already have coffee ready for me. Evenings were spent talking about our days, planning weekend adventures, dreaming about the house we would buy someday, the children we would have. Catherine threw herself into her career with a passion that was both admirable and sometimes concerning. She would stay late at the office working on campaigns, bring work home on weekends, and constantly push herself to take on more responsibility. I supported her ambitions completely, but sometimes I worried she was burning herself out. Meanwhile, I was finding my own success in the tech industry. I had moved to a startup where I could have more creative control, and was working on a project that had the potential to be really significant. The work was demanding, but I loved the challenge and the feeling that I was building something important. We bought our first apartment 3 years into our marriage, a 2-bedroom place with high ceilings and big windows that Catherine fell in love with immediately. She spent months decorating it, carefully choosing every piece of furniture, every color, every detail. She had this vision of creating the perfect home for us, and she executed it beautifully. Everything seemed to be falling into place exactly as we had planned. We were both successful in our careers, financially stable, living in a beautiful home, surrounded by good friends. We talked about starting a family soon, maybe in another year or two when we felt completely ready. But as I would learn, sometimes life has other plans. The changes started slowly, so gradually that I didn't notice them at first. It began about a year ago with small things that I dismissed as natural evolution in our relationship or temporary stress from work. Catherine started paying more attention to her appearance. Not that she had ever been careless about how she looked, but suddenly she was spending more time getting ready in the morning, buying new clothes more frequently, experimenting with different makeup looks. When I complimented her on looking especially beautiful, she would just smile and say she was trying to look more professional for work. She also began working later more often. What used to be occasional late nights became a regular occurrence. She would text me around 6 p.m. saying she had to stay for a client meeting or to finish an urgent project, and wouldn't get home until 9 or 10 at night. When she did come home, she seemed distracted, tired, not quite present in our conversations. The frequency of her work trips increased as well. Catherine had always traveled occasionally for work, but suddenly she was going out of town at least once a month. Sometimes for conferences, sometimes to visit clients, sometimes for what she described as team-building retreats. These trips would last anywhere from one night to a full week. I tried to be understanding. I knew Catherine was ambitious and that her career was important to her. I had always admired her drive and supported her professional goals. But I started to feel like I was living with a roommate rather than a wife. Our conversations became more superficial, focused on logistics and schedules rather than the deep, meaningful talks we used to have. The physical intimacy in our relationship began to decline as well. Catherine always seemed too tired or too stressed, or she had an early meeting the next morning. When we did make love, she seemed distant, going through the motions rather than being truly present with me. I tried talking to her about it, but she would get defensive and say that work stress was affecting her in all areas of life. Then there were the phone calls. Catherine had always been social, regularly talking to friends and colleagues. But the nature of her phone calls changed. She started taking calls in other rooms, speaking in hushed tones. When I walked into a room while she was on the phone, she would quickly end the conversation or switch to discussing work topics in an obviously forced way. Her phone behavior became particularly suspicious. Catherine used to leave her phone lying around casually, on the kitchen counter while she cooked, on the coffee table while we watched TV, on the nightstand while she showered. Now her phone was constantly with her. She would take it to the bathroom, keep it on her person while she cooked, even sleep with it under her pillow, claiming she was worried about missing important work calls. The few times I had tried to glance at her phone when notifications came in, she would quickly grab it and check the message herself, never sharing what it was about. When I asked directly, she would say it was just work stuff or spam. I started to feel paranoid, questioning myself constantly. Was I being unreasonably suspicious? Was this just normal evolution in a long-term relationship? Were my insecurities getting the better of me? I didn't want to be the jealous, controlling husband who questioned his wife's every move. I tried to dismiss my concerns and focus on other aspects of our life. I threw myself into work, started going to the gym more regularly, made plans with my own friends. But the nagging feeling that something was wrong wouldn't go away. The incident that really opened my eyes happened on a Tuesday evening in March. Catherine had called to say she was working late again, probably wouldn't be home until after 10 p.m. I had picked up dinner from our favorite Thai place, planning to wait for her so we could eat together and maybe watch a movie. By 10:30 she still wasn't home. I called her phone but it went straight to voicemail. I waited another hour, growing increasingly worried. Finally, around midnight, I decided to drive to her office building to see if she was okay. I imagined finding her passed out from exhaustion at her desk, or perhaps her phone had died and she was stuck in the building after hours. The office building was completely dark. The security guard in the lobby told me that the advertising agency had closed at 6 p.m., and no one was working late that evening. He was certain of this because he had to do security rounds of all the offices, and Catherine's floor had been empty since early evening. My heart started pounding as I drove home. Where was my wife? If she wasn't at work, where had she been for the past 6 hours? And why had she lied to me about working late? Catherine came home around 1 a.m., looking perfectly composed but claiming she had been at a work dinner that ran very late. When I told her I had gone to her office, she became flustered for a moment before explaining that the dinner had been at a restaurant across town, and then they had gone to a bar for drinks to continue discussing the project. The explanation was plausible, but something about her demeanor felt off. She avoided eye contact while talking, and her story seemed too detailed, as if she had rehearsed it. She also smelled different, a cologne or perfume that wasn't hers and definitely wasn't mine. That night, lying in bed listening to Catherine's steady breathing beside me, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out what was really going on. I started paying closer attention to Catherine's patterns and behaviors. I began keeping a mental log of when she said she was working late, what projects she claimed to be working on, and when she was traveling for work. I also started noting changes in her mood, appearance, and behavior. The pattern that emerged was troubling. Catherine's work emergencies seemed to happen most often on weekdays between 6 and 10 p.m. Her business trips frequently coincided with weekends or extended into weekends. And on the days following these late nights or trips, she seemed happier, more energetic, as if she was recharged by whatever she had been doing. I also noticed that Catherine had started dressing differently. Her work wardrobe had become more sophisticated and expensive. She was wearing perfumes I had never seen before, styling her hair in new ways, even changing the color of her nail polish more frequently. When I complimented these changes, she would credit them to wanting to update her professional image. The most troubling observation was how Catherine interacted with her phone. She had become incredibly protective of it, never leaving it unattended and always positioning its screen down when she set it anywhere. She had also changed her passcode. I knew her old one because we had shared it for practical purposes, but now she clearly had a new one that she hadn't shared with me. 2 weeks after the office incident, I witnessed something that removed all doubt from my mind. I had called in sick to work with a genuine case of food poisoning, spending most of the morning alternating between bed and the bathroom. Around 2 p.m. I was feeling slightly better and had moved to the living room couch to try to eat some toast and watch TV. From our living room window, I had a clear view of the street in front of our building. At around 2:30, I saw Catherine get out of a dark blue BMW that I had never seen before. She was laughing at something, looking back at the driver with an expression I recognized but hadn't seen directed at me in months, genuine joy and flirtation. The driver was a man I didn't recognize. From what I could see, he appeared to be in his late 30s or early 40s, well-dressed with dark hair. Catherine leaned down to the driver's window and spoke to him for several minutes, touching his arm in a way that was definitely not professional or casual. When she finally came upstairs, Catherine acted completely normal. She expressed concern about my illness, brought me tea, and settled into her usual routine of working on her laptop while sitting beside me. She never mentioned being driven home or who the man was. That evening, when I felt well enough to have a conversation, I casually asked Catherine how she had gotten home from work. "I took the subway like always," she replied without hesitation. The lie was so smooth, so confident, that it actually impressed me even as it broke my heart. This was not an impulsive deception or a small omission. This was a calculated falsehood from someone who had clearly become very comfortable with lying to me. I spent the next few days in emotional turmoil. Part of me wanted to confront Catherine immediately, to demand an explanation and force everything into the open. But another part of me needed to know the full extent of what was happening before I said anything. After a week of internal debate, I made a decision that felt both necessary and terrible. I hired a private investigator. Finding a private investigator felt like something out of a movie, not something that would ever be part of my real life. But I researched firms online, read reviews, and finally settled on an agency that specialized in marital investigations. The woman I spoke to, Detective Sarah Chin, was professional and compassionate. She explained their process, their rates, and assured me that they would be discreet and thorough. I understand how difficult this must be for you, Detective Chin said during our initial meeting. Most people hope they're wrong when they come to us. Unfortunately, in cases where someone has already observed multiple suspicious behaviors, they're usually right about their suspicions. I gave Detective Chin all the information I had: Catherine's work schedule, her recent patterns, a description of the BMW and its driver, and our home and work addresses. She explained that they would conduct surveillance for 1 week initially, documenting Catherine's activities during times when I believed she was being deceptive. The waiting was excruciating. Every interaction with Catherine felt loaded with hidden meaning. When she kissed me goodbye in the morning, I wondered if she was going to meet another man. When she came home late, I studied her face for signs of guilt or satisfaction. When she used her phone, I wondered who she was texting. Detective Chen called me exactly 1 week after we had hired her firm. "Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice gentle but professional, "I'm afraid we have found evidence that confirms your suspicions. Could you come in this afternoon to review our findings?" The detective agency's office was exactly what you would expect. A bland corporate space with generic furniture and motivational posters. Detective Chin met me in a small conference room with a manila folder that contained photographs, documents, and a detailed report. "I want you to know that what I'm about to show you will be difficult to see," she said before opening the folder. "Take your time processing each piece of information, and please ask questions if anything is unclear." The first photograph showed Catherine walking into an upscale hotel downtown, holding hands with the man from the BMW. They were both dressed nicely, Catherine in a dress I recognized as one she had recently bought for work events. The second photo was taken inside the hotel's restaurant. Catherine and the man were sitting close together at a corner table, engaged in what clearly appeared to be an intimate conversation. Catherine was leaning toward him, smiling in a way that was unmistakably romantic. The third photo showed them kissing in the parking garage next to his BMW. There were more photos: Catherine getting into his car after work, the two of them walking through a park holding hands, Catherine leaving his car in front of our building on multiple occasions. Detective Chin also provided me with information about the man. His name was Victor Morrison, age 38, divorced, owner of a successful chain of upscale restaurants in the city. He lived in an expensive penthouse downtown and drove the BMW I had seen, along with 2 other luxury vehicles. "Based on our surveillance," Detective Chin explained, "your wife has been meeting with Mr. Morrison approximately 3 times per week for the past month that we observed. These meetings typically occur during afternoon hours when you're at work, or in the evenings when she claims to be working late." The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. My wife of 7 years was having an affair with a wealthy restaurant owner, and she had been lying to me consistently for months. I thanked Detective Chen and left their office in a daze. I drove around the city for hours, not wanting to go home and face Catherine while I was processing what I had learned. I kept looking at the photographs as if staring at them long enough might change what they showed. The man in the photos could offer Catherine everything I couldn't: luxury, excitement, financial security beyond what I could provide. He was older, more established, more sophisticated. In the photos, Catherine looked happier than I had seen her in months, more alive and vibrant than she ever seemed at home with me. I decided not to confront Catherine immediately. I needed time to process my emotions and figure out what I wanted to say and what I wanted to happen next. I also wanted to speak to a lawyer about divorce proceedings, just so I would understand my options. The lawyer, David Kim, was recommended by Detective Chen's firm as someone experienced in divorce cases involving infidelity. He explained the legal process, how assets would likely be divided, and what I should expect in terms of timeline and costs. "The evidence you have is very clear," he told me. "In cases like this, most couples are able to reach an amicable settlement without going to trial. The question is whether you want to try counseling or mediation first, or proceed directly to divorce." I knew the answer immediately. The level of deception involved, the calculated lies, the elaborate cover stories, the months of double life, made it clear that our marriage was beyond repair. Catherine hadn't made a mistake or had a momentary lapse in judgment. She had systematically constructed a false reality to hide her affair, and that showed a fundamental lack of respect for me and our relationship. I spent the weekend alone while Catherine was on another business trip, making my final preparations for the conversation that would end our marriage. I organized the evidence, prepared what I wanted to say, and mentally rehearsed different scenarios for how Catherine might respond. On Sunday evening, Catherine returned from her trip seeming relaxed and happy. She unpacked her suitcase, told me about the conference she claimed to have attended, and settled into our usual Sunday night routine of ordering takeout and watching a movie. Looking at her sitting on our couch, laughing at something on TV, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was anger, of course, and hurt and betrayal. But there was also sadness for what we were losing, and even a strange kind of relief that the uncertainty and suspicion were finally over. "Catherine," I said during a commercial break, "we need to talk." Something in my tone must have alerted her that this was serious, because she muted the TV and turned to face me fully. "I know about Victor," I said simply. The color drained from Catherine's face. For a moment she looked like she might deny it, but then her shoulders sagged and she looked down at her hands. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "I hired a detective 3 weeks ago," I told her. "But I suspected something was wrong for months." Catherine was quiet for a long time. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Alex," she said. "I never wanted you to find out this way. I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did want to cheat on me," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's not that simple," Catherine said, wiping her eyes. "I know that's what everyone says, but in this case it really isn't that simple." I waited for her to explain, curious despite my anger about what possible justification she could offer. "Victor isn't just some man I met and decided to have an affair with," Catherine continued. He's my stepbrother." I stared at her, certain I had misheard. "What did you say?" "Victor is my stepbrother," Catherine repeated, looking directly at me for the first time since our conversation began. "When I was 5 years old, my mother remarried. Her new husband, Robert Morrison, had a teenage son from his first marriage. That was Victor." This information hit me like a physical blow. In all our years together, Catherine had never mentioned having a stepbrother. I knew about her complicated relationship with her mother, her father who had left when she was very young, and the series of her mother's relationships that followed. But she had never mentioned Robert Morrison or his son. "We lived together for about 4 years," Catherine continued, "until my mother and Robert divorced when I was 9. But Victor and I stayed close even after our parents split up. He was like a big brother to me, but also, more than that." I was struggling to process this information. "More than that how?" Catherine took a shaky breath. "When I was in high school, I developed feelings for Victor. Real feelings. I was 16, he was 24. I thought I was in love with him, and I thought he felt the same way about me." "Did he?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. "Yes," Catherine said simply. "But he knew it was wrong. He knew that acting on those feelings would be inappropriate and harmful. So he kept his distance. When I graduated high school, he helped me get into university here in the city, but he made it clear that we needed to have boundaries." "And that's when you met me?" I said, starting to understand the timeline. "Yes. When I met you, I thought I was over Victor. I thought what I had felt for him was just teenage confusion, and that I had found real, adult love with you. And I did love you, Alex. I still do. But," I prompted. "But 6 months ago, Victor came back into my life. His wife died of cancer after a long battle. He was devastated, and he reached out to me because he needed someone who knew him, someone who cared about him. His wife had been sick for 2 years, and he had been her caregiver while also trying to run his businesses and take care of their daughter. The pieces were starting to come together, but I still didn't understand why Catherine had felt the need to lie and sneak around. "Why didn't you tell me about him?" I asked. "Why all the secrecy and lies?" Catherine looked genuinely anguished. "Because I knew that if I told you I was spending time with a man I had once been in love with, you wouldn't understand. And because I wasn't sure I could trust myself around him." "And you were right not to trust yourself," I said bitterly. "Alex, please let me explain the whole story," Catherine pleaded. "I need you to understand what really happened." Despite my hurt and anger, I found myself wanting to hear the complete truth. "Go ahead." "When Victor first called me, it was just to talk. His wife had been gone for 3 months, and he was struggling with grief and with being a single father to Emma. That's his 8-year-old daughter. We talked on the phone a few times and I could tell he was really suffering." Catherine paused, gathering her thoughts. "I started meeting him for coffee just as friends. He needed someone to talk to who wasn't a therapist or a business associate. Someone who knew him as a person, not just as a client or patient. At first, it really was innocent." "At first," I repeated. "Yes. But being around him brought back all those old feelings. And I could tell he was feeling something too. The way he looked at me, the way he would touch my hand when he was talking about something emotional. And Alex, I have to be honest with you, Victor is the only man I ever loved before I loved you. Those feelings were buried, but they were never really gone." I felt sick hearing this, but I needed to know everything. "So when did it become an affair?" Catherine closed her eyes. 2 months ago. We were at his apartment. I had gone there to help him organize some of his wife's belongings that he was donating to charity. Emma was at a sleepover. We had been working all afternoon, going through photo albums and clothes and jewelry. It was emotional for him and I was trying to be supportive. She opened her eyes and looked at me with an expression of such sadness that it almost made me forget my own pain. We started talking about the past, about how we had felt about each other when we were younger. And he told me that he had never stopped loving me, that marrying his wife was an attempt to move on from feelings he knew he could never act on. And I told him that I had never stopped loving him either, that marrying you was supposed to help me forget about him. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. You married me to forget about him? No, Catherine said quickly. That's not what I meant. I loved you, Alex. I love you. But I would be lying if I said that part of why I was drawn to you wasn't because you represented a different kind of love, a safer kind of love, a love that didn't come with all the complicated history and forbidden feelings. This was somehow worse than if she had simply told me she had fallen out of love with me and found someone new. So you've been living a lie our entire relationship, I said. Not a lie, Catherine protested. I meant my wedding vows when I said them. I meant it when I told you I loved you. I built a life with you because I wanted to be with you. But there was always a part of my heart that belonged to Victor, and I thought I could live with that. I thought I could be satisfied with the love we had. Until he came back, I said. Until he came back, she confirmed. And I realized that what I felt for him was bigger than anything I had ever felt for anyone else, including you. We sat in silence for several minutes. I was trying to process not just the fact that Catherine had cheated on me, but that our entire relationship had been built on her attempt to escape from her feelings for another man. What happens now? I finally asked. I don't know, Catherine said honestly. I know I've hurt you terribly and I know that you probably can't forgive me. I know that our marriage is probably over. It is over, I confirmed. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Catherine nodded, tears flowing freely now. I understand. And I know you probably won't believe this, but I never wanted it to end this way. I hoped I could find a way to be happy with what we had. But you couldn't. No, she admitted. I couldn't. The next few months were the most difficult of my life. Catherine moved out of our apartment within a week, initially staying with a friend while she figured out her longer-term living situation. We began divorce proceedings immediately, working with mediators to divide our assets and determine the terms of our separation. To her credit, Catherine was completely fair in the divorce settlement. She didn't ask for alimony or try to claim more than her fair share of our joint assets. She seemed genuinely remorseful about the pain she had caused, even though she was clearly committed to pursuing her relationship with Victor. The hardest part wasn't the legal proceedings or the practical aspects of separating our lives, it was the emotional fallout. I felt like I had been living in a false reality for 7 years. How much of Catherine's love for me had been genuine, and how much had been an attempt to convince herself she could be happy with a substitute for what she really wanted? I found myself questioning every memory, every moment of happiness we had shared. When Catherine had smiled at me on our wedding day, had she been thinking about Victor? When she had told me she loved me, had she been comparing that love to what she felt for him and finding it lacking? The worst part was that I couldn't even hate Victor, because he wasn't some random man who had seduced my wife away from me. He was someone Catherine had loved long before she ever met me, someone who had a legitimate claim to her heart that predated our relationship by years. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, who specialized in helping people process infidelity and divorce. She helped me understand that Catherine's choices weren't a reflection of my worth as a person or as a husband. It sounds like Catherine genuinely cared for you and tried to build a life with you, Dr. Martinez explained during one of our sessions. But she was never fully emotionally available because part of her heart was always with someone else. That's not your fault, and it doesn't mean you weren't worthy of her complete love. But how could I not have seen it? I asked. How could I have been so blind to the fact that she was settling for me? Because she probably didn't fully understand it herself, Dr. Martinez replied. Many people convince themselves they can be happy with a practical, stable love when what they really want is a passionate, all-consuming love. Catherine may have genuinely believed she could be satisfied with what you offered until she was confronted with the alternative. Slowly, with therapy and time, I began to rebuild my sense of self-worth. I started to understand that while the end of my marriage was devastating, it was ultimately better for both Catherine and me that the truth had come out. She deserved to be with someone she loved completely, and I deserved to be with someone who wasn't settling for me as a safe alternative to their true love. About 6 months after our divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected phone call from Catherine. She asked if we could meet for coffee to talk. I was hesitant, but ultimately curious about what she wanted to discuss. We met at a neutral cafe downtown, both of us clearly nervous about seeing each other again. Catherine looked different, happier, more relaxed, but also somehow older. The stress of maintaining a double life and going through a divorce had taken its toll on both of us. "I wanted to thank you," she said after we had ordered our drinks and exchanged awkward pleasantries. "Thank me for what?" "For handling everything with such dignity," Catherine replied. "You had every right to be angry and vindictive, but you weren't. You made a difficult situation as easy as it could possibly be." "I was angry," I told her. "I'm still angry sometimes. But I also understand that staying angry wouldn't change anything or make me feel better." "Still," she said, "I appreciate how you handled it. And I want you to know that I really am sorry for the way everything happened. I should have been honest with you from the beginning, about Victor and about my feelings." "Why weren't you?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Catherine thought for a moment. "Because I wanted so badly to be the person who could be happy with what we had. I wanted to be someone who could love you the way you deserve to be loved. I thought if I just tried hard enough, I could make myself into that person. And now I understand that you can't force yourself to feel something you don't feel, no matter how much you want to or how good the other person is," Catherine said sadly. "I should have figured that out before I married you, not after." I asked about her relationship with Victor, not because I enjoyed hearing about it, but because I was curious about whether it was working out the way she had hoped. "It's good," she said carefully. "It's complicated because of Emma, Victor's daughter, and because we're both still dealing with the fallout from our choices. But yes, it's what I always thought it could be." "And Emma?" I asked, remembering that Victor had an 8-year-old daughter who had lost her mother to cancer. Catherine's face softened. "She's amazing. It's been an adjustment for all of us, but she's a remarkable little girl. She's been through so much, but she's resilient and sweet and funny. Victor is a wonderful father." Despite everything, I found myself genuinely glad that Catherine had found happiness, even though it had come at the cost of our marriage. Before we parted ways, Catherine said something that has stayed with me ever since. "I hope someday you find someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved," she said. "Not as a safe choice or a practical decision, but as their first choice, their only choice, their everything." It took me nearly 2 years after my divorce to feel ready to date again. I had spent that time focusing on therapy, my career, my friendships, and rebuilding my confidence and sense of self. I had also done a lot of thinking about what I wanted in a future relationship and what lessons I had learned from my marriage to Catherine. The woman who eventually became my girlfriend came into my life in the most unexpected way, through Dr. Martinez, my therapist. Dr. Martinez had a colleague, Dr. Emily Foster, who was a clinical psychologist specializing in trauma recovery. Emily had recently gone through her own difficult divorce and was looking to expand her social circle with people who understood the challenges of rebuilding after a major life change. "I have a friend I think you might enjoy meeting," Dr. Martinez said during one of our sessions. "Not romantically necessarily, but as someone who might understand what you're going through. She's also rebuilding her life after a marriage that ended in unexpected ways." I was hesitant at first. The idea of meeting someone through my therapist felt strange, and I wasn't sure I was ready for any kind of new relationship, even a friendship. But Dr. Martinez assured me that Emily was simply looking for platonic connections with people who had similar life experiences. Emily and I met for lunch on a Saturday afternoon at a casual restaurant downtown. She was different from Catherine in every way, shorter, with curly blonde hair and warm brown eyes, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater rather than the carefully coordinated outfits that Catherine had always favored. What struck me most about Emily was her directness. Within the first 10 minutes of our conversation, she had acknowledged that we were both there because we were divorce survivors, trying to figure out how to build new lives, and she seemed completely comfortable with that reality. "So what's your story?" she asked after we had ordered our food. "Dr. Martinez said you went through a particularly difficult situation." I found myself telling Emily about Catherine and Victor, about discovering the affair, about learning that I had been the safe choice rather than the passionate love. Emily listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions and nodding in recognition at certain parts of the story. "My situation was different but similar in some ways," Emily told me when I had finished. "My ex-husband didn't cheat, but he did lie about who he was and what he wanted from life. We were together for 6 years and I thought we were building toward the same future. Turns out he was just going along with what I wanted while secretly resenting all of it." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I wanted children, a house in the suburbs, a traditional family life. He said he wanted those things too. We bought a house, started trying to get pregnant, made all these plans. Then one day he announced that he had never wanted any of it, that he had just been trying to make me happy, and that he couldn't pretend anymore. Emily's story was different from mine, but I understood the feeling of discovering that your partner had been living a lie, that the life you thought you were building together was based on deception. The worst part, Emily continued, was that he acted like I had forced him into lying. Like it was my fault for wanting things he didn't want, rather than his fault for not being honest about his feelings. We spent 3 hours at that restaurant, talking about our experiences, our therapy journeys, our hopes and fears about the future. Emily was intelligent, funny, and refreshingly honest about her own struggles and insecurities. When lunch ended, we made plans to meet again the following week for a hike. Then the week after that we went to a movie. These weren't dates exactly, we were both clear about that, but they were the foundation of a genuine friendship. Over the next several months, Emily and I became close friends. We would meet regularly for various activities, text each other throughout the week, and provide mutual support as we both navigated the challenges of starting over in our 30s. What I appreciated most about Emily was that she never tried to fix me or rush my healing process. She understood that recovering from betrayal and divorce was a long journey with ups and downs. When I had bad days, she would listen without trying to cheer me up or offer solutions. When I had good days, she would celebrate the progress with me. Slowly, without either of us planning it, our friendship began to evolve into something deeper. The shift was so gradual that I can't pinpoint exactly when it happened, but I started looking forward to our time together in a way that felt different from friendship. The first time I realized I was developing romantic feelings for Emily was during a conversation about our future goals. We were walking through a park on a beautiful spring afternoon, talking about where we wanted to be in 5 years. "I think I want to travel more," Emily was saying. "I spent so many years focused on building a life with my ex that I never took time to explore what I wanted for myself. I'd love to see Europe, maybe take a sabbatical and spend a few months abroad." "That sounds amazing," I said, and then without thinking added, "I'd love to travel with you sometime." Emily stopped walking and looked at me with a small smile. "Would you?" "Yes," I said, realizing as I said it that I meant it in a way that went beyond friendship. "I think I would really love to travel with you." We stood there in the middle of the park path, looking at each other with new awareness of what was happening between us. Emily reached out and took my hand. "I should probably tell you that I've been thinking about you as more than a friend for a while now," she said quietly. "Really?" I asked, feeling a flutter of excitement mixed with nervousness. "Really?" But I didn't want to complicate our friendship, especially since we're both still healing from our divorces. "I've been thinking about you the same way," I admitted. "But I was worried about the same thing." We talked for another hour in that park, discussing our feelings, our concerns, and what it might mean to transition from friendship to romance. We both agreed that we wanted to take things slowly, to be honest with each other about our fears and insecurities, and to prioritize the emotional connection we had built rather than rushing into physical intimacy. Our first official date was dinner at a small Italian restaurant, not unlike the place where Catherine and I had our first date, but the experience was completely different. With Emily there was no performance, no trying to impress or be someone I wasn't. We had already seen each other at our lowest points, already knew each other's flaws and vulnerabilities. The physical aspect of our relationship developed naturally over several months. Emily was patient with my insecurities about intimacy after Catherine's betrayal, and I was understanding of her need to feel emotionally safe before becoming physically vulnerable. What struck me most about being with Emily was how different it felt from my relationship with Catherine. With Catherine, I had always felt like I was trying to live up to some idealized version of myself, trying to be worthy of her love and attention. With Emily, I felt accepted exactly as I was, flaws, insecurities, and all. Emily never made me feel like I was competing with anyone else for her affection, the way I had unconsciously competed with Victor throughout my marriage to Catherine. When Emily told me she loved me, I believed her completely, without reservation or doubt. Now, 3 years after my divorce from Catherine and 18 months into my relationship with Emily, I can look back on that painful period of my life with some perspective and understanding. The betrayal I experienced taught me several important lessons about love, relationships, and myself. First, I learned that you cannot make someone love you the way you want to be loved, no matter how good a partner you try to be. Catherine's inability to love me completely wasn't a reflection of my inadequacy, it was a reflection of her own emotional unavailability and unresolved feelings. Second, I learned the importance of complete honesty in relationships, even when that honesty is difficult or potentially hurtful. Catherine's decision to hide her history with Victor and her ongoing feelings for him robbed us both of the chance to make informed decisions about our relationship. If she had been honest from the beginning, I might have chosen not to pursue a relationship with someone who was still in love with someone else, or we might have found a way to work through those feelings together. Third, I learned that real love, the kind worth fighting for, is characterized by choice rather than resignation. Catherine loved me, but she settled for me. Emily loves me and chooses me actively, every day, not because I'm safe or practical, but because she genuinely wants to be with me more than anyone else. Fourth, I learned that healing from betrayal requires forgiveness. Not necessarily forgiveness of the person who hurt you, but forgiveness of yourself for the ways you may have ignored red flags or settled for less than you deserved. I had to forgive myself for not recognizing that Catherine was emotionally unavailable, and for staying in a relationship where I was always trying to prove myself worthy of love. Finally, I learned that it's possible to find love again after devastating heartbreak, but only if you do the work to understand what went wrong and what you need to change going forward. My relationship with Emily is healthier and more fulfilling than my marriage to Catherine ever was, but that's only possible because I spent 2 years in therapy learning about myself and what I needed from a partner. About 6 months ago, I received an invitation that I never expected, Catherine and Victor's wedding invitation. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake or cruel joke. Why would Catherine invite her ex-husband to her wedding to the man she had cheated with? But when I called the number on the invitation to RSVP, Catherine herself answered the phone. "Alex, I'm so glad you called," she said, sounding genuinely pleased to hear from me. "I wasn't sure if you would." "I have to admit I'm surprised by the invitation," I told her. "Are you sure you want me there?" "I know it's unconventional," Catherine replied, "but you were such an important part of my life for so long. Victor and I talked about it extensively, and we both feel like we want to celebrate this new chapter with the people who helped shape us into who we are today." I was touched by the gesture, but also uncertain about whether attending would be emotionally healthy for me. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Of course," Catherine said. "And Alex, I want you to know that if you do decide to come, you're welcome to bring Emily. Victor and I would love to meet her." The fact that Catherine knew about Emily and wanted to meet her somehow made the invitation feel more genuine and less awkward. I discussed the situation with Emily, who was incredibly understanding and supportive. "I think you should go if you want to," she said. "It might be good closure for you, and it sounds like Catherine is genuinely trying to honor the role you played in her life." "Would you come with me?" I asked. "If you want me to, absolutely," Emily replied without hesitation. In the end, Emily and I decided to attend the wedding together. It was held at a beautiful garden venue outside the city, with about 80 guests in attendance. Catherine looked stunning in a simple, elegant dress, and Victor looked happy and relaxed in a way that the detective photos had never captured. The most touching part of the ceremony was when Catherine and Victor each spoke about their journey to find each other again. Catherine acknowledged that their path to marriage had been complicated and had caused pain to people they cared about, but that they were committed to building a life together based on complete honesty and mutual respect. During the reception, I had a chance to meet Emma, Victor's daughter, who was now 10 years old and clearly adored Catherine. She was a bright, articulate child who had adapted well to having Catherine as a stepmother. I also had several conversations with Victor, who was gracious and kind. He thanked me for handling the divorce with dignity and for not making the situation more difficult than it needed to be. "I want you to know that I have tremendous respect for you," Victor told me during one of our conversations. "Catherine has told me what a good husband you were to her, and I'm sorry that our situation caused you pain. It was a surreal experience, but ultimately a positive one." Seeing Catherine and Victor together, it was clear that they belonged with each other in a way that Catherine and I never had. There was an ease and natural connection between them that I recognized was absent from my marriage to Catherine. Most importantly, attending the wedding gave me complete closure on that chapter of my life. I was able to see that Catherine's choice to leave our marriage wasn't a rejection of me personally, but rather an acceptance of where her heart truly belonged. Emily and I moved in together 8 months ago, and we're currently looking at houses to buy together. The process of house hunting with Emily has been completely different from the apartment hunting I did with Catherine years ago. With Catherine, I always felt like I was trying to anticipate what she would want, trying to find places that would make her happy. With Emily, we discuss our preferences openly, compromise easily, and make decisions together as true partners. We found a house last week that we both love, a modest 3-bedroom colonial with a big backyard and lots of natural light. Emily wants to use one of the extra bedrooms as a home office, and I want to set up the other one as a workshop space. We're talking about getting a dog, maybe starting a garden, creating a life that reflects both of our personalities and interests. The most remarkable thing about being with Emily is how effortless it feels. We don't have to work at being compatible, we just are. We share similar values, complementary personalities, and genuine affection for each other that doesn't require constant maintenance or validation. Emily knows the complete story of my marriage to Catherine and my divorce, and she's never made me feel like I need to compete with that past or prove that I've moved beyond it. She accepts that experience as part of what shaped me into the person she fell in love with. Similarly, I know about Emily's difficult first marriage and the ways it affected her ability to trust and be vulnerable. We both bring some emotional scars to our relationship, but instead of those scars being barriers between us, they've become sources of mutual understanding and compassion. We've talked about marriage and both of us want that eventually, but neither of us feels rushed. We're both in our mid-30s now, and we understand that building a strong foundation is more important than hitting conventional relationship milestones on a predetermined timeline. We've also talked about children, and we're both hopeful that will be part of our future together. Emily's experience with wanting children and having that dream deferred by her first husband has made her cautious about making concrete plans, but she's optimistic that we can create the family we both want. As I write this story, nearly 4 years after discovering Catherine's affair, I find myself grateful for the experience in ways I never could have imagined at the time. The betrayal and subsequent divorce were devastating, but they also freed me from a relationship that was fundamentally flawed. Catherine and I were never right for each other in the way that really mattered. We loved each other, but we weren't each other's person in the deepest sense. I now understand that Catherine's affair wasn't really about me or about any inadequacy on my part. It was about her recognition that she had never gotten over her first love and her decision to pursue that connection regardless of the consequences to our marriage. While her methods were hurtful and deceptive, her underlying realization was probably correct. She belonged with Victor, not with me. The tragedy wasn't that she discovered this truth, but that it took her so long to acknowledge it, causing unnecessary pain to everyone involved. My experience has taught me that there are different kinds of love, and not all of them are sufficient to build a life together. Catherine loved me, but it was a practical love, a safe love, a love that was more about what I represented than who I was. Emily loves me for myself, my personality, my quirks, my way of seeing the world. The difference is profound and unmistakable. With Catherine, I always felt like I was performing the role of husband, trying to be the man she needed me to be. With Emily, I get to be myself completely, and that self is not only accepted but cherished. I've also learned that forgiveness is possible even after devastating betrayal, but it's a process rather than a single decision. There were many days during and after my divorce when I hated Catherine for what she had done to our life together. There were times when I fantasized about revenge or about finding ways to hurt her the way she had hurt me. But holding on to that anger was ultimately more harmful to me than it was to her. Forgiveness didn't mean excusing Catherine's choices or pretending they hadn't caused me pain. It meant accepting what had happened, learning from it, and choosing to move forward rather than staying trapped in bitterness. The fact that I was able to attend Catherine's wedding and genuinely wish her well is proof to me that I've successfully processed that experience and integrated it into my understanding of myself and my life. If someone had told me 4 years ago that my wife's betrayal would ultimately lead me to a happier, healthier relationship, I would never have believed them. At the time, it felt like my world was ending, like I would never be able to trust anyone again, like the pain would never fade. But time really does heal, and sometimes what feels like destruction is actually just clearing the way for something better to grow. I don't recommend infidelity as a path to personal growth. There were certainly less painful ways for Catherine and me to recognize that we weren't right for each other. But I'm grateful for where that painful experience ultimately led me. I'm grateful that Catherine found the courage, however belatedly, to pursue the love she really wanted rather than continuing to settle for what was safe and convenient. I'm grateful that I learned to value myself enough to leave a relationship where I wasn't truly cherished. And I'm grateful that both of us eventually found partners who love us the way we deserve to be loved. Most of all, I'm grateful for Emily, who taught me what it feels like to be someone's first choice, their enthusiastic choice, their joyful choice. She showed me that love doesn't have to be complicated or painful or uncertain. Sometimes, when you find the right person, it can simply be good. As I finish writing this story, Emily is in the kitchen making dinner, humming along to music while she cooks. In a few minutes, I'll close my laptop and join her, and we'll eat together while talking about our days and making plans for the weekend. It's an ordinary evening, but it's also everything I ever wanted: a life built on honesty, mutual respect, and genuine affection. A partnership where both people choose to be there every single day. The betrayal that once felt like it would destroy me ultimately set me free to find the love I was meant to have. And for that, despite all the pain it caused, I am finally genuinely grateful. Thank you for listening to my story. If you had a similar experience, share it in the comments. And also subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos.